The prison yard was loud, restless, and hungry for entertainment. Then the new inmate stepped out. Thin glasses, baggy uniform, books pressed to his chest like a shield. A nerd. At least that's what everyone thought. The bullies noticed immediately. 3 of them. Big, bored, and desperate for someone to crush. The leader smirked. "Hey, Einstein," he called out. "This ain't a library. Drop the books." The nerd didn't move, didn't speak. He just sighed softly and kept walking. Bad choice. They surrounded him within seconds, shoving him, slapping the books from his hands, laughing as pages fluttered across the dirt. "Look at him," one bully jeered. "He's shaking." But he wasn't shaking. He was breathing. Slow, controlled, perfectly measured. And when the biggest bully shoved him again, the nerd finally looked up, revealing eyes that had seen far more than textbooks. In the next heartbeat, the yard heard 3 quick impacts. Fists so fast no one saw them coming. And suddenly all 3 bullies were stumbling back, holding their ribs, gasping for air. Silence fell, because the nerd they mocked wasn't weak, wasn't scared. He was a former state boxing champion, a man who once knocked out professionals twice his size. And the bullies had just woken up a beast who preferred peace, but knew war better than any of them. Stay with me until the end, because what he does next in that yard will change the prison's power hierarchy forever. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. What you just witnessed was the moment Marcus Thompson's carefully constructed facade cracked wide open. For 3 months, he'd played the role perfectly. Quiet bookworm, harmless academic, the kind of guy who'd rather solve equations than throw punches. But here's the thing about facades. They only work when nobody tests them. Marcus had learned early in his sentence that survival meant invisibility. Keep your head down. Stay out of trouble. Read your books and count the days until freedom. It was a strategy that had served him well through his first 90 days at Riverside Correctional. Nobody knew about the trophies gathering dust in his mother's attic. Nobody knew about the newspaper clippings from his amateur days, when reporters called him Lightning Thompson for his devastating combinations. Nobody knew that behind those wire-rimmed glasses lived the focused intensity of a man who'd once dominated regional boxing circuits. Marcus preferred it that way. Boxing was his past. Prison was temporary. And mixing the two seemed like a recipe for extending his stay. But some moments don't give you a choice. The 3 men who cornered him that Tuesday afternoon weren't just looking for entertainment. They were establishing territory, marking boundaries. In the complex ecosystem of prison politics, fresh meat like Marcus represented opportunity. Show weakness once, and you'd be prey for the rest of your sentence. The leader, a hulking man named Vince Carrera, had built his reputation on intimidation. 6'4", shoulders like a linebacker, arms covered in tattoos that told stories of violence both inside and outside these walls. Vince ran protection rackets, controlled contraband flow, and maintained order through fear. His 2 lieutenants flanked him like attack dogs. Rico, a wiry man with dead eyes and quick hands, specialized in psychological warfare. He'd find your weakness and exploit it until you broke. The third, a massive guy everyone called Tank, handled the physical enforcement when intimidation failed. They'd been watching Marcus for weeks, the new fish who spent his time in the library, the quiet one who never caused trouble, never made waves, perfect target material. What they couldn't have known was that Marcus had been watching them too. Prison taught you to read people quickly. Marcus had cataloged their movements, their habits, their tells. Vince telegraphed his punches with a slight shoulder dip. Rico favored his right side after an old knife wound. Tank was powerful but slow, relying on size over technique. Professional boxers learn to process information at superhuman speeds. In the ring, you have milliseconds to identify openings, calculate angles, and execute combinations. 3 months of forced retirement hadn't dulled those instincts. When Vince made his move that afternoon, Marcus saw it coming from across the yard. The setup was classic prison theater. Create a scene, draw a crowd, make an example. Vince knew that every inmate would be watching, measuring, deciding whether this newcomer deserved respect or ridicule. "Pick up your books, college boy," Vince commanded after the initial shove. His voice carried the lazy confidence of a man accustomed to obedience. "Then crawl back to your cell and stay there." The yard had gone quiet. Conversations stopped. Card games paused. Even the guards seemed to sense the tension, though they remained at their posts, unwilling to intervene in what looked like harmless hazing. Marcus bent to gather his scattered books, philosophy texts mostly. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, ancient wisdom about finding peace in chaos. The irony wasn't lost on him. "That's right," Rico sneered. "Good little nerd knows his place." Tank laughed, a sound like grinding concrete. "Maybe we should help him learn some respect. Take him behind the laundry building, show him how things work around here." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Behind the laundry building was where scores got settled, where bones got broken, where weak men learned to surrender their dignity or their safety. Marcus straightened slowly. Books pressed against his chest once more. His breathing had shifted into the rhythm he'd learned years ago in grimy gyms and bright-lit arenas. Deep inhale through the nose. Slow exhale through slightly parted lips. Heart rate controlled. Mind focused. Vince stepped closer, invading personal space in that calculated way predators do. "You hear me talking to you, Four Eyes? I asked you a question." The moment stretched taut as a violin string. Every inmate in the yard could feel it. The guards shifted nervously. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Then Marcus spoke for the first time since entering the yard. His voice was quiet, steady, almost gentle. "I heard you." 3 words that somehow changed everything. Not the words themselves, but the way he said them. No fear, no anger, just calm acknowledgement. Vince's face darkened. Disrespect was currency in this place, and Marcus had just shortchanged him in front of everyone. "Then why aren't you moving?" "Because," Marcus said, adjusting his glasses with one finger, "you're standing in my way." The audacity of it sent ripples through the crowd. A few inmates actually gasped. Nobody talked to Vince Carrera like that. Not if they wanted to keep their teeth. Rico stepped forward, ready to escalate. "Big mistake, nerd. Huge mistake." But Vince held up a hand, stopping his lieutenant. A slow smile spread across his face. This was better than simple intimidation. This was theater, public execution of respect. "You got some mouth on you for a bookworm," Vince said. "Let's see if you can back it up." The circle tightened. Escape routes vanished. The crowd pressed closer, sensing blood in the water. That's when Marcus did something that confused everyone present. He smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a scared smile. A professional smile. The kind a craftsman gives when someone asks him to demonstrate his expertise. "I really don't want any trouble," Marcus said, his voice still soft. "I just want to read my books." "Too late for that," Tank growled, cracking his knuckles. "Should have thought about that before you got mouthy." The first punch came from Rico. A quick jab aimed at Marcus's ribs. Fast, practiced, meant to double him over and start the beating proper. Marcus moved like water. The punch slid past him by inches. In the same motion, his left hand shot out. A precise uppercut that caught Rico under the chin. The impact was surgical. Rico's head snapped back, his eyes rolled white, and he crumpled like a marionette with cut strings. Tank charged next, all muscle and rage. His haymaker could have taken Marcus's head clean off. If it had connected, Marcus slipped inside the arc. His movement so fluid it seemed choreographed. His right hand found Tank's solar plexus with devastating accuracy. The big man's forward momentum became his enemy as Marcus's punch drove every ounce of air from his lungs. Tank folded in half, gasping like a landed fish. 2 seconds, 2 punches, 2 men down. Vince stood frozen, his brain struggling to process what had just happened. The quiet nerd with the thick glasses had just dismantled his crew with the casual efficiency of a professional. Because that's exactly what Marcus Thompson was. The silence in the yard was deafening. 300 inmates stood motionless, their minds racing to catch up with what their eyes had just witnessed. The impossible had become reality in the span of a heartbeat. Vince Carrera, the undisputed king of Riverside Correctional, found himself staring at a puzzle he couldn't solve. His 2 enforcers lay groaning in the dirt, victims of strikes so precise they seemed almost surgical, and standing before him was the same quiet bookworm who'd spent 3 months invisible in the prison library. But those eyes, those weren't the eyes of a victim anymore. Marcus adjusted his glasses again, a gesture that had seemed nervous before but now carried an entirely different meaning. It was the movement of a man checking his equipment, a professional preparing for work. "Like I said," Marcus repeated, his voice carrying across the silent yard, "I just want to read my books." The crowd held its collective breath. Everyone knew what came next. Vince couldn't let this slide. Not in front of everyone. His entire empire was built on the foundation that he was the apex predator in this concrete jungle. Challenge that foundation, and everything crumbles. But Vince was smart. Smart enough to recognize that this wasn't some lucky college boy who'd landed a couple of wild punches. The way Marcus had moved, the precision of those strikes, the complete absence of wasted motion. This was training. Years of it. "Who are you?" Vince asked, his voice lower now, more careful. Marcus bent down and picked up his fallen books, brushing dirt from their covers with the same gentle care he'd shown for 3 months. Marcus Thompson. Just a guy trying to do his time quietly. Bullshit. The word came from somewhere in the crowd. An older inmate named Carlos, a lifer who'd seen everything these walls had to offer. "I know that name. Lightning Thompson. You fought out of Chicago, didn't you?" The recognition hit the yard like a physical force. Whispers started spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Lightning Thompson. The amateur champion who'd turned down a professional contract to finish college. The Golden Gloves winner who'd knocked out 3 fighters in one tournament. The prodigy who'd disappeared from boxing just as he was hitting his prime. Marcus's shoulders sagged slightly. His carefully maintained anonymity was dissolving in real time. "That was a long time ago. Not that long," Carlos continued, his voice gaining strength as memory sharpened. "You were supposed to fight Martinez for the regional title. Then you just vanished. What happened?" The question hung in the air like incense. Marcus glanced around the circle of faces, seeing his past reflected in their eyes. The secret he'd worked so hard to bury was clawing its way to the surface. "Life happened," Marcus said simply. "Choices were made. Consequences followed." But the crowd wasn't satisfied with vague answers. They wanted the story. In prison, stories were currency, and this one promised to be valuable. Vince sensed the shift in power dynamics. His authority was slipping with every passing second. The nerd he'd planned to humiliate was becoming a legend before his eyes. Time to reassert control. "I don't care if you're Muhammad Ali's ghost," Vince snarled, stepping over Rico's still groaning form. "You just disrespected me in front of everyone. That can't stand." Marcus looked up from his books, meeting Vince's gaze directly. "I didn't disrespect anyone. You asked me to move. I told you why I couldn't. Your men decided to escalate. My men are down because of you. Your men are down because they threw punches at someone who knows how to throw them back." The simple truth of it stung. Vince had built his reputation on picking fights he knew he could win. This wasn't supposed to be a fight at all. It was supposed to be a demonstration, a teaching moment for the new fish. Instead, it had become something else entirely. Marcus straightened to his full height, and for the first time since entering the yard, he looked every inch the fighter he'd once been. The slouch was gone. The nervous energy had vanished. What remained was the coiled confidence of a man who'd spent years learning to hurt people efficiently. "Here's what's going to happen." Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I'm going to walk back to my cell. I'm going to read my books. Tomorrow, I'll come back to the yard and read some more. And if anyone has a problem with that, they're welcome to discuss it with me." The challenge was clear, direct, unavoidable. Vince felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes on him. Every inmate in the yard was waiting to see how he'd respond. Show weakness now, and his reign was over. But charging into a fight with a former champion seemed like suicide by stupidity. "You think you're tough because you knocked out a couple of my boys?" Vince said, buying time while his mind raced for options. "This isn't some gym in Chicago, Thompson. This is prison. Different rules." Marcus nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right. In the gym, we had referees, weight classes, 3-minute rounds with rest between them." He paused, letting that sink in. "Here, it's just you and me until one of us can't continue." The mathematical precision of the threat was terrifying. No emotion, no anger, just a simple statement of fact delivered with the calm confidence of a man who'd done this before. Rico was finally struggling to his feet, one hand pressed to his jaw, his eyes unfocused. Tank remained doubled over, still fighting to get air back into his lungs. Both men looked at their boss with expressions that mixed fear and confusion. The crowd began to murmur. Betting odds were being calculated. Alliances were being reconsidered. The power structure that had seemed unshakable 10 minutes ago was shifting like sand. That's when the guards finally decided to intervene. "All right, break it up!" Officer Martinez shouted, his voice cutting through the tension. "Everyone back to your cells. Show's over." But it wasn't over. Everyone in the yard knew it. This was just the intermission. As inmates began to disperse, conversations buzzed with speculation. How good had Lightning Thompson really been? What had brought him to prison? And most importantly, what would happen when he and Vince inevitably faced off again? Marcus gathered his books and walked toward the cell blocks, his movements once again those of a quiet academic. But now everyone was watching. Every step was analyzed. Every gesture was interpreted. Behind him, Vince helped his men to their feet, his mind already working on the problem of Marcus Thompson. He couldn't let this stand, but he also couldn't afford to lose a direct confrontation with a former champion. That night, as lights out settled over Riverside Correctional, conversations continued in hushed tones throughout the cell blocks. Stories were shared, rumors were born, and slowly, the legend of Lightning Thompson began to spread through the prison like a virus. Marcus lay on his narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling. He'd known this day would come eventually. The mask always slipped sooner or later. He'd just hoped to serve his time quietly and return to his old life without incident. But prison doesn't allow for quiet lives. It demands choices. Predator or prey, hunter or hunted. And Marcus had just declared himself neither. He'd declared himself something far more dangerous. He'd declared himself a professional. Word travels fast in prison. By morning, every inmate at Riverside knew the story. The quiet bookworm had hands like lightning. The untouchable Vince Carrera had been challenged in front of everyone. And somewhere between the breakfast line and work detail assignments, Marcus Thompson had become the most talked-about man in the facility. But Marcus wasn't interested in fame. He sat alone at his usual table in the cafeteria, methodically eating his oatmeal while reading Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. The irony of sharing a name with the philosopher wasn't lost on him. Both men had faced impossible circumstances. Both had chosen discipline over chaos. The difference was that Marcus Aurelius never had to worry about getting shanked in the shower. Conversations stopped when Marcus walked by. Inmates studied his movements like film students analyzing a masterpiece. How did someone so unassuming move with such devastating precision? Where had he learned to fight like that? And why was he here, in this concrete tomb, when he could have been making millions in boxing rings across the world? The answers to those questions lay buried in Marcus's past, a past he'd spent 3 months trying to forget. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday night in Chicago. Marcus had been preparing for his biggest fight yet, a championship bout that would have launched his professional career. The caller was his younger sister, Sarah. Her voice was shaking. "Marcus, it's Mom. She's in the hospital. They found something. Cancer. Stage 3. Aggressive. The kind that steals everything from you slowly, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but memories and medical bills." Marcus withdrew from the fight. Then he withdrew from boxing entirely. His mother needed treatment, and treatment needed money. The kind of money that came from making desperate choices. The drug deal was supposed to be simple. One transaction. Enough cash to cover 6 months of chemotherapy. Marcus had convinced himself he was doing something noble, sacrificing his clean record for his mother's life. But simple drug deals don't exist. The buyer was an undercover cop. The seller was an informant, and Marcus Thompson, former Golden Gloves champion and honor roll student, became another statistic in the war on drugs. His mother died anyway, 6 months later. The treatment had bought them time, but not enough. Marcus was already serving his sentence when she passed, unable to hold her hand or say goodbye properly. That was the weight he carried into Riverside Correctional, the guilt of failed sacrifice, the rage of watching everything slip away despite his best efforts, the knowledge that his choices had been wrong, but his intentions had been pure. For 3 months he'd buried that pain in philosophy books and quiet routine. But pain has a way of demanding recognition, and yesterday afternoon, when Vince Carrera pushed him too far, that recognition had come in the form of 2 perfectly placed punches. Now, sitting in the cafeteria under the watchful eyes of 300 inmates, Marcus knew there was no going back to invisibility. His secret was out. His reputation was growing, and in prison, reputation was everything. A shadow fell across his table. Marcus looked up to find Officer Martinez standing there, his expression unreadable. "Thompson, warden wants to see you." The walk to the warden's office felt like a funeral march. Every inmate they passed watched with mixture of curiosity and concern. Being called to see the warden after a yard incident usually meant one thing: solitary confinement. Warden Patricia Holbrook was a small woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen every trick in the book. She'd run Riverside for 15 years, maintaining order through a careful balance of fairness and fear. She gestured for Marcus to sit across from her desk. "Interesting day yesterday," she began, not bothering with pleasantries. "Yes, ma'am. 3 inmates required medical attention after an altercation with you. Want to tell me your side?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "They initiated physical contact. I defended myself." "Defended yourself." The warden's tone suggested she found that amusing. "Mr. Thompson, I've seen the security footage. What you did wasn't self-defense. It was a masterclass in controlled violence." She leaned back in her chair, studying him. "I also did some research after our little incident. Lightning Thompson, regional Golden Gloves champion, undefeated amateur record, turned down multiple professional contracts." She paused. "What's a man with your talents doing in my prison?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus had rehearsed this conversation in his head dozens of times, but facing it in reality felt different, more final. "I made poor choices, ma'am. I'm paying the consequences." Poor choices. Warden Holbrook opened a file on her desk. "Drug trafficking, first offense, no prior record, exemplary behavior since arrival." She looked up at him. "This doesn't fit the profile of a career criminal, Mr. Thompson." Marcus remained silent. His story was his own to keep or share. The warden stood and walked to her window, which overlooked the prison yard. "You know what I see when I look out there? A powder keg. Men with nothing to lose, surrounded by other men with nothing to lose. Violence simmering just below the surface, waiting for the right spark to explode." She turned back to face him. "Yesterday you could have been that spark. Instead, you showed remarkable restraint. 2 precise strikes to neutralize threats. Then you walked away." No gloating. No escalation. Professional. Marcus wasn't sure if he was being praised or criticized. "Here's my problem," the warden continued. "Vince Carrera has run his little empire in my prison for 3 years. He maintains order through fear, but he keeps the peace. Inmates respect his authority because they're afraid of the consequences. Now you've challenged that authority. Publicly." She sat back down, her gaze intense. "Vince can't let this stand. He'll come for you again. And next time it won't be a simple fistfight. It'll be war. And when that war starts, innocent people will get hurt." Marcus understood the implications. Prison politics were delicate ecosystems. Upset the balance, and chaos followed. "What do you suggest, Warden?" "I'm offering you a choice. I can put you in protective custody right now. 23 hours a day in a cell, minimal human contact. But you'll be safe. Serve out your remaining 18 months in isolation." The alternative hung unspoken between them. Stay in general population and face whatever Vince Carrera could throw at him. "Or?" Marcus asked. "Or you help me solve a bigger problem. There's going to be violence regardless. Vince won't let yesterday slide. But maybe, just maybe, we can control how that violence plays out." She slid a photograph across the desk. It showed a young inmate, barely out of his teens, with the kind of fear in his eyes that Marcus recognized from his first day. Tommy Nguyen, 19 years old, in here for burglary. He owes money to Vince's organization, money he doesn't have. In 3 days, they're going to make an example of him. Unless someone intervenes. Marcus studied the photograph. Tommy looked like he belonged in a college dorm, not a prison cell. Another kid who'd made poor choices and was paying a price that seemed too steep. "You want me to protect him. I want you to send a message. That there's a new power structure in this prison. One based on something other than fear and intimidation." The proposal was elegant in its simplicity. Use Marcus's newfound reputation to establish a counterbalance to Vince's authority. Create competition in the marketplace of prison politics. But it was also incredibly dangerous. Marcus would be painting a target on his back that would never fade. Every day for the next 18 months would be a potential battleground. And if I refuse, then Tommy Nguyen gets hurt. Vince consolidates his power, and you spend the rest of your sentence watching your back anyway. Marcus thought about his mother, about the choices that had brought him here, about the weight of responsibility that seemed to follow him everywhere. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Warden Holbrook smiled for the first time since he'd entered her office. "I'm asking you to be exactly who you've been pretending not to be. Lightning Thompson. Champion. Leader." She stood up, signaling the end of their meeting. "Think about it. But don't think too long. Tommy Nguyen doesn't have much time." As Marcus walked back toward the cell blocks, his mind raced through possibilities and consequences. Every choice led to violence. Every path forward was paved with risk. But maybe that was the point. Maybe running from who he used to be had been the real mistake. Maybe trying to disappear into quiet anonymity had only delayed the inevitable. In boxing, there was a moment in every fight when you had to decide who you really were. Fighter or victim. Champion or pretender. It was the moment when technique and training gave way to something deeper. Something that couldn't be taught or faked. Marcus had faced that moment dozens of times in the ring. Now he was facing it again, in a place where the stakes were higher and the rules were deadlier. That afternoon, as he sat in the library reading his philosophy books, Marcus noticed Tommy Nguyen at a corner table. The kid was trying to study, but his hands were shaking. Every few minutes he'd glance toward the door like he expected death to walk through it. Which, in 3 days, it probably would. Marcus closed his book and made a decision that would change everything. Not just for Tommy Nguyen, but for every inmate at Riverside Correctional. He walked over to Tommy's table and sat down across from him. "You're in trouble," Marcus said quietly. Tommy's eyes widened in panic. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. And in 3 days, that trouble is going to find you whether you acknowledge it or not." The kid's composure cracked. "Look, I know who you are now. Lightning Thompson, right? The boxer? But this isn't your problem, man. You don't want to get involved in this. Marcus studied Tommy's face. Behind the fear was something else. Determination. The kid wasn't going to go down without a fight, even if that fight was hopeless. What if I told you it doesn't have to be hopeless? I'd say you don't know Vince Carrera very well. Marcus smiled. The same professional smile he'd worn in the yard yesterday. Actually, I think I'm starting to understand him perfectly. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Here's what's going to happen. In 3 days, when they come for you, you're going to be ready. And you're not going to be alone. Tommy's eyes searched Marcus's face, looking for deception or false hope. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Because, Marcus said, standing up and gathering his books, sometimes the right choice and the smart choice aren't the same thing. And I've been making smart choices for 3 months. As he walked away, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since entering Riverside. Purpose, direction. The clarity that came from finally stopping running from who he really was. Lightning Thompson was back, and the prison's power structure was about to learn what that really meant. Behind him, Tommy and Nguyen sat in stunned silence, processing what had just happened. For the first time in weeks, the crushing weight of despair lifted slightly from his shoulders. Maybe, just maybe, he was going to survive this after all. But survival was just the beginning. What Marcus Thompson was planning would reshape Riverside Correctional from the ground up, and it would all start in 3 days, when fear met fury in a collision that would echo through every cell block in the prison. The quiet bookworm was gone forever. In his place stood something far more dangerous, a champion with nothing left to lose. The countdown began the moment Marcus made his promise to Tommy and Nguyen. 72 hours until Vince's crew would come collecting. 72 hours to prepare for a war that would determine not just Tommy's fate, but the entire balance of power at Riverside. Word spread through the prison's underground network like wildfire. Lightning Thompson had chosen a side. The quiet bookworm who'd embarrassed Vince's top enforcers was now openly challenging the established order. Inmates whispered in corners, placing bets, choosing allegiances. Some saw opportunity. Others saw suicide. Marcus spent those 3 days doing something unexpected. He talked, not to the shot callers or the gang leaders, but to the forgotten ones. The kids like Tommy who'd made stupid mistakes and found themselves drowning in a system designed to break them. The older inmates who just wanted to serve their time quietly. The men who worked kitchen duty and laundry detail, invisible cogs in the prison machine. Each conversation was the same. Simple. Direct. Change is coming. You can be part of it, or you can watch it happen. But it's coming either way. By the second day, something remarkable began to happen. The forgotten inmates started talking back. They shared stories of extortion, of protection rackets, of debts that could never be repaid. They spoke about fear that had governed their lives for months or years. Marcus listened to every story, memorized every detail, built a map of Vince's empire that was more complete than anything the warden's files contained. When the 3rd day arrived, Marcus Thompson walked into that yard carrying more than just his philosophy books. He carried the hopes of every forgotten inmate who'd ever been crushed under Vince's boot. The quiet revolution had found its champion. The confrontation that followed wasn't just about Tommy Nguyen's debt. It was about everything that prison represents. Fear versus courage. Oppression versus justice. The moment when someone finally says enough and means it. Marcus didn't just win that fight. He dismantled an empire built on intimidation and replaced it with something unprecedented. Respect earned through protection rather than fear. Leadership through service rather than domination. A new order where strength defended the weak instead of preying on them. 6 months later, when Marcus walked out of Riverside Correctional, he left behind a legacy that would endure long after his release. The quiet bookworm had become something far more powerful than any bully could ever be. He'd become a leader who understood that true strength isn't about how hard you can hit, but about who you choose to protect with that power. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who looks like they don't belong there. Because when quiet people finally decide to fight back, they don't just throw punches. They change everything.